Hi, everybody. Welcome to our October 2023 Southeastern PA Chapter of Wild Ones meeting. We are glad you could join us tonight. Our meeting is being recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel within the next week or so. A link with the meeting and our newsletter will be emailed to everyone who received an invitation to our meeting tonight. Since our last chapter meeting, we've had 5 new members join, which brings our total up to 125. I'd like to share with everybody the people who make this chapter run. I'm Jessie Schiffler. I am the president. We have our secretary with us, Susan, tonight, who runs our webpage and our Facebook posts and just keeps us going, and she does our wonderful newsletters. Denise is our treasurer, keeps all of our books tidy. Judy reaches out to our new members and anybody interested in the chapter to answer questions. Rick is temporarily, we're calling the events coordinator. He's one of our board members, along with Marilyn and Judy and Denise and Susan and I. But we're always looking for more people who are interested in helping make the chapter go. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. These are the ways that you can find us. We have a website for our chapter. We have a YouTube channel that has all of our past meetings recorded. Lots of great presentations and information are on there. Instagram's spotty, although I have seen we've had a couple of people who have joined the chapter because of Instagram, so that's great. And we have a Facebook page also. Our new members have come from Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, Downingtown, and Wynwood. So if you are a member and you see your town pop up there, know that you might be able to meet up with these people and do things in greater spaces than just your backyard in your local areas. Chapter business includes our financial report. We've got lots of money. We want to be putting it to plants to get native plants in the ground. In the coming years, hopefully we can do better at spending that to do just that. We have a chapter newsletter that comes out every time we have a meeting. And if you have contributions you would like to see in the newsletter, reach out to our secretary, Susan, to get those things into our newsletter. The last thing for our chapter business before we get to our main presentation is that we have to have our elections of our board of directors and our officers for next month. And the slate of officers is thankfully Rick Smith as president. The vice president position is still open. Denise is agreeable to staying as our treasurer, thankfully, Susan as our secretary, and Judy as our membership chair. So I thank you all for the opportunity that I've had to be the president since the start of our chapter. I've had a great time. I've learned a lot. I've made some really great friends, and we've done a lot of good things. I am very excited to pass the torch come to next month's meeting so you can all vote for Rick and everyone else to approve the board of directors and the officers. Tonight's meeting, I am very excited to announce, let me find it here. Mark is a lecturer, photographer, musician, and native plant consultant with special interest in the seeds of native plants and the design, installation, and management of native plant meadows. Since 1990, he has been horticultural coordinator for the Brandywine Conservancy and Museum of Art and is responsible for the native plant horticulture programs that take place on the campus of the Brandywine Museum of Art, located in Chadford, PA. Mark has been generous in providing us a handout to go along with this presentation that will be attached to our newsletter when that's distributed later this month. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Mark to start sharing his screen and start his presentation. And he'll go over the guidelines of how he'd like us all to conduct ourselves.
Can you hear me, folks?
I hear you, Mark.
Great. Can you see my first panel? Title panel?
We see your first panel and we see the next slide to the right.
Okay, so we don't want it that way.
No sneak peeks.
So let's try setting that up again.
Hi.
How's that?
I see you.
You see the first slide and only the first slide?
I only see you. I see no slides.
Okay, so let's troubleshoot this. We had this working just fine.
It worked just fine. Yep.
So do you have a suggestion? I'm going to clear this one out.
Do you have share screen at the bottom of your Zoom window?
I'm no longer seeing that.
If you have two monitors, I think you're sharing the other monitor.
I do not have two monitors. Let me try launching. I can hear you, so the meeting is open.
Yep, and we see your face. So I think it's just.
Well, let me see. Let me try. Seeing anything?
Yep, we see all of your available slides. There, now we see.
There we go.
There you go.
Now, how about see the first slide only?
Correct. Yep.
Great, we got there. Awesome. Okay, so good evening, everyone. As you heard, I am Mark Gormel. I am the horticultural coordinator at the Brandywine Conservancy and Museum of Art. I've been here, it feels like forever, sometimes. I have been living and developing and experimenting with the things that you're going to hear about for 33 years. And as I was talking with Jesse in the beginning here, I know this stuff so well that I will sometimes drift towards telling you probably way more information than you really want to hear. So my challenge is to try to figure out, without seeing all of you, just how much information to give you, and keeping my eye on the clock. I'm going to ask you as we go. This is very clearly divided into sections, 7 steps. And if you pencil down or pen down questions that you might have in a particular section, it may be easier to go back to them and answer them, which I will gladly do at the conclusion. Having said that, I also will say the handout that Jesse mentioned is really, it is specifically created for this lecture. So all of the key points that I'm going to talk about are in that handout, summarized with some of the same language you will hear me saying. You won't have the visual, but I hope that letting the visual sink in while I'm talking about this will serve as a reference point for when you see the handout and you can look at that again, okay? So the title of this is 7 Steps Towards Successful and Ethical Seed Collection. That may be a little mysterious, but the ethics part really comes into play with approaching doing seed collecting on public property, not so much for your garden, your neighbor's garden, or a family member's garden, but really when you're going out into a wild area, which one can make a big impact with if they are not being sensitive and sensible about it. So let's move into this a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the text there and show you some of these gorgeous things that we're going to be looking at later. Once you really start looking at seeds of plants, you find they're just as interesting as the plants themselves. It's just a different facet of the plant. In this particular panel, up in the upper right, oh, can you see this pointer as I'm wiggling it around? Does that show up on for you? Now, how about if I do, not that, let's try this. Can you see this? Yes, you can. Great.
Yeah.
Because it's helpful for me to highlight or point out things that way as I'm going. So this group of seeds here is Jack in the Pulpit seeds. It's Erycema triphyllum. This down here are the seeds of Lilium canadense, the Canada lily. These are down in the lower left are Polygonatum biflorum, the great Solomon seal. And up here are actually these same seeds cleaned out of their fruit. So there's a little bit of an intro into how diverse these can be in this world. And they're all are very unique, and even more so when you start looking at them very, very closely. Let's go ahead and start about these 7 steps. So the first one is basic seed collection guidelines, which we will do. We'll do these in sequence. Let me turn that radio down. I got a work radio here. We're going to talk about why it's important to record locations and flowering and fruiting dates, and how this will help you become more successful at what you're doing. We're going to talk about the critical aspect of observing carefully and when to judge timing of collection, because it's so crucial to being successful at this. We're going to talk about the kinds of equipment that you can use to collect and the kind of technique you might use when you're doing collections. Then we're going to talk about how you handle the collections that you've brought in, because you do have to be thoughtful about this too. And then we're going to cover some cleaning and then how to store what you've collected. Those are the 7 steps. So let's keep moving ahead. First thing is, and it may seem really obvious, but if you have an urge to collect seeds, that urge can hit you at any time you see them. And sometimes it's kind of hard to resist the urge of taking things that you don't even know what they are. And I recommend that before doing collection, that you really do know what the species is and something about its status. For example, is it on the federal or state level? Is it rare, threatened, endangered, or common? Is it a native plant in your area, or is it not? These are important things that will guide you in being an informed seed collector. Another thing that's really important to note here is that it's a good idea to ask permission to collect seeds on any public or private land. And a lot of people don't know it's actually a crime to collect anything without a permit from state or federal land. Just saying, just so you know. Here's an important one, I feel. Maintaining respect for a species' right to exist and reproduce itself. Using sound and informed common sense with regard to the amount of seed taken from any wild population. Now, you'll see recommendations vary a little bit about this, and it can depend, it does depend on the commonness or the rarity of a species. But generally, collecting no more than about 1/3 of the seeds from a lone individual plant in the wild or from a small populations. And this, I guess, again, is especially important if you're talking about rare, threatened, or endangered species. You always want to work to minimize your disruption to the surrounding community. And of course, that's just as true in a garden as it is in the wild. You don't want to be damaging that particular community that you're moving in and out of because you're anxious to get the seeds from those plants. This is all having to do with respect and loving those things for the living creatures that they are and their right to be there and to have a life, a full life. Now here's another one that brings us a little more home, and then we'll switch steps. Find out which method of seed propagation is recommended for each species before collecting its seeds, as this may have a critical influence on the success of your effort. Quick example, there are seeds which have to be handled very specifically or they will die while they're sitting around on your desktop or in your garage or something like that while you're going to get to them a little bit later. That certainly is a waste of your time and the plant's effort and being rather, I think, disrespectful. If that sounds a little hard-nosed, I will tell you that I have been guilty of this myself at times. So I try not to be now, but I have made this error over the years, and it's relatively an easy one to avoid for the most part. With that in mind, there are sources to help you figure these things out. Here are three, and these are in the handout, so you don't need to scramble to write these down as I'm showing you them. But the book on the left is relatively new. That's from William Kalina when he was at Garden in the Woods. And it's an excellent book to get to understand how to propagate. This is wildflowers in this case. I think he's got a tree and shrub book as well. The book in the middle is one that was only self-published. This was a book by Norm Dino, or is a book by Norm Dino, who was a Penn State chemistry professor. In his retirement, he did an exhaustive set of studies about seeds and their germination requirements. And that was only available through him for a while, but you can get that online now. And that, again, that's in the handout, how to access that. Now, this is a real deep dive, although it's not, it's certainly accessible for anybody who wants to learn more about germinating the seeds that they've collected. You will learn a whole lot if you want to get into that level by getting that book, a reprint of it. The one on the right is also still available. This is probably the first one that I came across as a much younger person, Growing and Propagating Wildflowers by Harry Phillips. This was published by the North Carolina Botanical Garden in its time. That's available as reprint. I think that's available on Amazon. That's a really neat book to get that covers a bit about how to collect, how to clean, and then how to germinate things. It's still one of the better all-around ones that I know of for getting started. All right, so there's some sources, and undoubtedly there are others that I don't know about, but these are ones I can attest to being valuable. So let's move into the second step. This has to do with making records. Records is important if you want to really advance in doing this well. And I will show you an example coming up here in a string of slides about how this is played out for us at Brandywine. Recording locations of the flowering and the fruiting dates. Okay, so each year, the variations in weather cause the windows of time that things are flowering and fruiting. They vary a little bit. Many species, when they're in fruit, aren't anywhere near as noticeable. So if you have records about where things are that you're really especially interested in, makes it much easier to go back and look at them in with what might be a very busy community. And I'll show you an example of this. But you can mark these with flagging tape or string or stakes or something that brings your attention back to where that plant is that you really wanted to go back to when the seeds were ripe. So let's look at a string here of how this is played out, how I developed this approach at Brandywine. If you've been to the Brandywine River Museum, or now the Brandywine Museum of Art, as we call it, you will recognize the north face, the facade of the museum here, and possibly the stormwater management basin, or what we call the pond bed, in the very front. This is between two parking lots, one on the left, one on the right of the image that you're looking at. So we're coming out of winter. I'm going to go show you what the season looked like this one particular year when I photographed this. So the water in here is the stormwater. It's the runoff from the parking lot to the left of the view. And this was a radical thing at the Brandywine. This was mid 70s, this was installed, and this was really set up to be managing the stormwater so that it wasn't running into the Brandywine, which is just farther over to the right of our view. But this was also planted with plants that like to have wet feet, but also could handle being completely dried out when they weren't flooded. But here we are. This is probably March or early April or something. Moving forward, same view. You can see no snow. Things are starting to green up. You see the water. You can see the parking lot each side now, and still the museum's facade. And then later, this would have probably been like April, May at that point. That was Iris versicolor in the foreground, and Iris pseudacaris, which is a non-native iris that we had in there at that point. And there's ostrich fern off to the right, and you can see way back here is a fringe tree. All of these things in the spring display. And then moving forward into more like middle of the summer, we've got Joe Pye weeds, we've got rudbeckias, we have Asclepias incarnata down here. It's all very full. New England aster is showing up there in the background, and is hibiscus, crimson-eyed rose mallow, swamp rose mallow, all these things in the same community. I'm just showing you all the changes that happen in this one space. And then moving right into the fall, where we're starting to see the color in the woody plants. Now you can appreciate, I think, there's a lot of different species growing in that community. This isn't strictly really wild, but it's as close to wild as you would get in any public setting. Knowing where to find things in here can get to be very challenging. So, and this is the way it is on our campus, which is a very naturalistically designed campus and maintained. I started in a way of tracking these things, just taking a very simple map. This is just a plan view of the portion of the campus. We were looking, this bed labeled the pond bed, we were looking this direction towards the front of the museum, if that helps get you oriented that way. And you can see over here, I've just got inked in species. There's a Sarum canadense and Polemonium reptans and Phacelia pershii and Jeffersonia diphylla. I use different colors. And then on the map, here's a green, here's a patch of a Sarum, here's a patch of a Sarum. The Phacelia was here, it was here. I don't know if you can see the blue that well. I can see it well enough. Blue here, Phacelia patch, another one over here. And it wasn't real specific, but that alerted myself and the people that were working in the program as collectors where to go at this time to look for these species so that we could collect them, right? And here's notes, the dates. There's so done, no more by 6/9, done, that was all collected, so on and so forth. Very simple, but very effective. And now you start doing this, you can take this data and start putting it into organized formats. You'll also find, as we did probably, that it's helpful to develop a system of acronyms that shorten the names of places so that you can just say, you will find such and such in the AMB, the Amelanchier bed of in front of the museum, and so on and so forth. And then taking it a little further, those dates, particularly, here's species, Astronovae anglii, at large sea areas in, well, that's not a good example for me to point out, was it? How about the first one? Gentiana claus was brand new at this time, and that was in P8A, which was the propagation area. But you see what we were doing, we were listing them out in an Excel program, and then putting the earliest date that we collected good seed that was confirmed by inspection, and the latest date that we collected good seed from that particular location. The window that's here, I won't talk about this in great detail, but here between 1009 and 1102 is just about 4 weeks, it's just about a month. But the window of time that seeds are collectible isn't the difference between these two. And if you really want to hear why that is, we can talk about that later. But that's more of a nuance. But do notice that some of these many locations would you find some of these species. But this documentation like this, because we started keeping maps and recording these things, allowed us to summarize this work so that next year we weren't inventing it all over again. We were just getting efficient about going, looking. They're not ready yet. Next week should be good. Recording the times and so on and so forth. And so we kept going. Okay. We're ready for step number 3. So we've talked about importance about keeping some records. Let's talk about looking very closely at the plants and observing to determine when the right time to collect might be. The way I highlight this is saying that ripeness in seeds is almost always indicated by a visual change in the seed itself and or the attendant fruiting structure, whatever's housing the seed. There's a change in its appearance. Many seeds and or the structures that contain the seeds will turn from green or white to tan, brown, or black, while the fleshy fruit encasing others may become very vivid in color, as with the next one I'll show you, which is Lindera benzoin, the spice bush. This is a shrub in our area, very common, but this year has been really heavy fruit set, more than I've seen in so many years. Very easy to see this when it's in fruit. Now, this is a plant that many birds eat. The flesh on the fruit is very high in lipids and fats. It's got really high caloric value to migrating and resident songbirds. And in a typical year, the fruit is almost not noticeable because it gets eaten so quickly. This year, there's lots of it showing, and there's plenty of it around. So it's much easier to notice it if you haven't. But this color change, by the time these seeds look like this, they are ripe, right? The other thing that happens with, that goes along with the visual indication is that typically the seed is easy to come off of the plant. There's an increased ease of separating it from the plant. If you have to tug hard on many seeds, this is particularly true with herbaceous plants, the seeds really aren't ripe yet. I will talk about this more when we have other slides to illustrate it, but here, this one, we're doing more color changing. A lot of you may be growing viburnum nudum, which is what this is, the possum haw viburnum. Wonderful color display here, from the green to this glowing pink to later the dusty blue. And after a while, they turn up into kind of dark blue raisins. You'll see a picture of that later, but they're ripe at this point for sure, and the birds are beginning to eat them. Let's look at some herbaceous plants and talk about this. This is Aquilegia canadensis, the wild columbine, and these flowers are in the prime of their life. They're full and taut, and anthers are visible. This is something that often is pollinated by hummingbirds. And if you consider that the nectar is up here in the tip, you can appreciate why a hummingbird can come along, push its bill and its tongue way up into here to get at the nectar. But guess what its chest is doing at that point? It's bumping into those anthers and transferring pollen from one flower to the next as it moves around from plant to plant to plant. Let's look at the same thing, just a bit older. See how the tubes are starting to get shrunken a little bit and flattening out? That flower is getting older now. Pretty soon it's going to look like these, because these are the developing seeds, the follicles that contain the seeds of wild columbine. This flower is going to continue the structure. The petals are going to drop off, and this is going to lift itself up until it's upright like these are. And the way this capsule is designed, the inner part of each one of these fingers, these follicles, has a seam in it, and its seam is going to open up when the seeds are truly ripe. And after they've dried out and browned, it's going to look like this. Now, at the inside of all this now are just, each follicle is open. And what it really is a vase with shiny black seeds inside of it. And the simplest action of knocking these stems is going to cause these seeds to spill out. When you go to collect these, it's a piece of cake to do this. You just clip off the stems right below those vesicles, those vases, and then take care not to tip them over before you put them into a coffee can or something, because they're just going to spill out. As the wind is moving them around, a little bit of them are shaking out, and rain is probably splashing some. But at this point, it's very easy to collect a lot of them just by cutting off that whole follicle and dropping it into a container. I won't talk about that now, but anyway, that's that sequence with wild columbine and classic. This one's wild geranium. And this one is an example of one that when the seed is ripe, in the case of back up for a second, in the case of the wild columbine, that sits there for quite some time. And even if you're much later getting to it, there's still going to be some seed left in those capsules typically. Wild geranium is something which ripens very quickly and suddenly, and it actually throws its seed away when they're ripe. So here's the structure that's produced from that flower, turns into this. And these have already thrown their seeds away. So if you picture each one of these, there's only 5 of them per flower. Each one of these is attached at the base when it is green. And as the seeds are ripening, these are turning dark. They're starting to turn black. There's a certain point where the style is darkening and the whole thing is drying. And at a certain point, this just snaps up. And each one of these little buckets is open on this side, on the inside. So when it snaps this up and springs up like this, the seed that's in there gets flung out and away from the plant. So you don't have much of a window of time with this. There's only 5 seeds per flower. And the window of this, once they start, the flower's probably thrown its seeds away in a day. So you have a short window of time to determine when to take these or when to walk away and come back the next day. Now, let's look at another example of how ripeness proceeds. This is Liatris spicata, the dense blazing star. Liatris is a plant which blooms from the top down. So these individual flowers are fully open. These are not open yet. And that's the progression it makes. So that's the way that the seeds ripen. So here you're looking at the stem of Liatris, turned brown. Can you see that the tip of this is a little bit bare? It's not quite as evenly fuzzy as the rest of it is. Those seeds at the very tip have already come off because they're ripe enough to fall away easily. And that's what seeds do when they're really ready. In this case, these have a tuft of hairs attached, which is easily able to move around on the fur of an animal or be dislodged by a bit of blast of wind and move. The seeds in this case are these charcoal brown or black slate gray structures with the tuft of hairs at the top of them. We will talk about cleaning seeds, getting the hairs off later. But for now, recognize that in this example, they're starting to fall off the stem, right? And because this ripens from the top down, you can either go with your fingers and just ruffle them off the stem to dislodge them into a paper bag or a can or something. And you'll get to a point where they're not coming off because they're not completely ripe yet. And then you can come back next couple of days or next week and get after the rest of them. You could also just clip off the end at a point where you judge these are ripe, these are not ripe. And that is very efficient to work with. Another dynamic of ripening, this is Lobelia cardinalis, the cardinal flower. they ripen in the opposite progression from the bottom up the stem. So these are all in full flower. These have not yet opened, right? So this is the progression this plant makes. And you can judge your collection method accordingly. You either pick off individual pods as they're ripening down lower on the stem, or you wait to a point if you don't have a lot of time at visiting and you're only going to be in this particular part of your garden one time or something, you're going to be away for a week traveling, you might choose to just cut the tip off and then accept that some of these weren't going to make seeds, but you got the majority you could get for propagation. That's a judgment call that you might make. Okay, so we've talked about some more of those dynamics. And here's one more before we change steps. This you may recognize is the seed pod of Asclepias syriaca. This is the common milkweed. Notice that the pod casing is turning kind of gray. This is a very distinctive pod with the milkweed. The others are more slender. Common milkweed is kind of thick and bulbous. But notice the seeds inside are rich brown, and they are absolutely ripe. And this seam, I did not cut this with a knife. This pod has a seam in it that it is designed with, and it splits open along the seam. And in a little bit later part of the presentation, I'll show you how you can go about cleaning these things by taking advantage of this and judging whether the seeds inside are ripe. If you're not sure you want to cut the pods off yet, there's a way of evaluating this without removing it from the plant. But when seeds look like this and they're white to begin with, then they kind of turn from white towards this rich brown. All right, so let's move into step number 4, which has to do with equipment and technique. I like to say that the union of species and site conditions determines the when. So what a plant is and what its timetable is and the growing conditions it is in determine the weather variables, the soil, the amount of sunlight, and so forth. That determines the when of when this is going to take place. But the how-to of collection and post-collection is largely the realm of creative ingenuity and can often be achieved with common everyday materials that you modify to suit how you want to work. Many species are effectively and efficiently collected just by hand picking alone. Others require pruners or sharp knives for removing individual seed pods or entire stem ends that bear numerous pods. But you're also going to need containers for transporting things from the field, back to your place, back to wherever you're going to work on them. Coffee cans, lunch or grocery bags of paper or cloth, buckets. Plastic bags you can use, but I stress, be careful with plastic bags because they do not allow water vapor to pass through them, and you can easily promote fungal and or bacterial growth, which can be a disaster in your collection if that happens, and it can happen quickly in a plastic bag. So let's look at some of the things we've come up with. This grinning lineup of people here were collectors that I photographed one particular day wearing something that we call the tie-on collection bags. These were developed by us, and actually made by this woman, Debbie, who worked in the clothing industry before she became a volunteer with us. We first made these bags out of paper. You can see these were paper. And you could do this very simply. The first ones we made were grocery bags that we punched holes into, strung a cord through so you could tie it around your waist. And now you have your hands free to drop collections into a bag, which is very useful when you're working in a crowded space and you want to have both hands, maybe one for grabbing, one for using pruners. Very helpful. These bags, these were repurposed birdseed bags. So they're a plastic mesh The huge advantage with this is these can be wet. If you're collecting on a day that it's a little bit drizzly or wet, that paper will load up and tear out relatively quickly, which limits the kind of days you can be working. These don't care about being wet whatsoever and are really reusable. And if we were doing this in person, I would be thrilled to show you the number of details that Debbie put into these bags, because they're really, there's much more to them than you can see in this image. Here we have our thematic presentation. The Blue Jay crew is going out to do collections that day, this particular day. I think we're going out for warm season grasses. It's Emily on our left, in the middle is Kathy and Fitzy. Usually doing these things is fun in a group, and I didn't have to probe them very hard to smile like that. They were just having a good time. But consider that if you're working in a location which is very dense, this is the front of the museum for those of you that may have not have been there. The statue there, the boy with hawk, doesn't stand there anymore, but that was the very front. And so we don't want to be going into there and trampling everything in our quest to collect seeds. So these two are carefully wiggling their feet in. They're wearing bags, and they're cutting and collecting things, dropping them into the bags. They don't have to put something on the ground and make an imprint and, you know, get to it and move the object or the container to a new spot. They're just wearing the container with them, and their hands are free. So here's Joan. She's out in the meadow doing Indian grass. And again, she's wearing one. You can't see it, but she's free to just reach around with her hands to collect Indian grass, Sorghastrum nutans, which the seed head looks like this. And we will begin collecting this very soon now. Now, I mentioned before that there is an increased ease of separation when the seed is ready to leave the parent plant. It's relatively easy to remove. This is what the seed head of Indian grass looks like when it's backlit and the seeds are, you know, they're ripe, the stem, and they're dried out. It's just glistening, glowing in the sun. If you take your fingers and put it down below on the stem and just squeeze ever so gently and lift up along the stem, these seeds are going to come right off in your hands like I'm showing you here. Clusters of them, which I would now drop into the bag, and I've got them. If I try doing this before they are ripe, they will just not come off the plant without really tugging, because they're not ready to let go yet. And that's the point where you really want to collect seeds. They're completed, they're matured, and the plant is ready to let them go off into their new lives right at the point where they're ready. With most seeds, you cannot take them early and have them ripen. It would be just the same thing as having a child born way too early and the kind of complications that might happen. They need to stay on the plant until the process is completed. And usually with seeds, having them come off more easily is one of the indicators you have, along with the visual changes in how it looks. This is one that I know Marilyn is watching. She did this, I think, on Tuesday. This is Tridens flavus when it's more purpley, metallic-y purple. They're not ripe yet. When this is ripe, with the gentlest of pressure lifting up on the stems, and sort of these you have to hold over into a bag, but you're just kind of stroking the stems to get the seeds to fall off. This grass, we sometimes call it grease grass, because it's waxy and there's a soot in it, and it's always there. And if you're doing this without gloves on, this is what your fingers look like after you've been doing this for an hour or something. And this is kind of a fun thing to sort of tease people to see who's really been working while you're out there in a field, and who hasn't, because their hands will be clean. This does wash off quite easily with soap and water, but it's a curious thing that happens with purple top grass is the common name. And that's the window for collecting for that is right now. It's a neat warm season grass. It should be in any meadow project anybody puts in. Now let's look at another one. These are the fluffy heads of a goldenrod called rigid stem goldenrod, hard-leaved goldenrod. This is Solidago rigida, biggest goldenrod flowers that are out there. We're just looking at the seed head now, but see the fluffy puffball-like stage that it's at. At this point, those seeds are ready to come off with not a whole lot of disturbance. The wind will start knocking them off. Goldfinches love those, by the way, and they'll do a big number on a patch once they start getting ripe. They don't even wait until they're ripe all the time. There's a technique that we use, or a variation of. When they're in the stage I just showed you, this volunteer is bent over the stems into a paper bag, and she's flailing at it with the back of her fingertips. That makes the loose seeds, the ones that are ready to let go, drop into the bag. Those that aren't ready to let go stay. And because she hasn't cut the whole stem off, she's just bending the stem over, you let the stem rise back up, you come back next week and you do this again, you get a whole other batch of seeds that are truly ripe. If you were to cut a stem like this, you would get only a fraction of what's going to be ripe on it, because the rest of them would not finish. They would not completely ripen. Here in the bottom of a bag like that, this is what you would find. All this sort of collection of fluff. And we'll look at this example of how we turn the fluff into clean seeds in a later step. But that's a method there. Once you've observed that they're in that fluffy puffball stage, is what I always call it. Here's a nice, easy one to show. This is all of the coneflower types. This is a Rudbeckia. You might know this as Rudbeckia goldsturm, although this one was Rudbeckia fulgida variety speciosa, but it's very similar to one you might know that's in the trade that's labeled goldsturm, Rudbeckia goldsturm. At any rate, most of these coneflower types, an easy indicator that the seeds are ripe is when the stem below the head has turned brown. They're not quite ready here. They may be very close, but they're not going to let go out of these heads either when it's this green below. But when you see this, it's safe to collect them every time. Okay, so let me show you a quick way that we were doing some of these in the field when we had a big patch of that particular plant. And we wanted to streamline the process a little bit. What's happening in this slide is that the person that has their back to us is bending over to clip entire stems from a patch. And this volunteer, Joan again, is swatting the heads against the side of this cart, which was a steel-bodied conveyance, and she's whacking it. And because those seeds are so ready to come out, the first time she whacks those heads against the side, they're just showering out. And the second swing, they're still showering, but there's fewer. The third, there's fewer. The fourth, there's fewer. And at a certain point, you say, okay, I've whacked that one pretty hard, and not much more is going to come out. Is that then you just toss these stems over into the pile that's going to go to the compost. In the bottom is all the fallout that got knocked out. And there you have, this was our staff gardener, Nora, on the left. She's screening them to get rid of the largest, the stems and the leaves that also got whacked off, while Dot and Joan are still finishing up a little bit. We would sieve this out in the field, put all that into a jar, and then it would still have to go inside to be spread out, to be dried before we could actually clean it. So that's one way. This is a kind of a sloppy way to work, but it saved a whole lot of space for us at that time. But you could only do this when they were really ready to come out of those heads. So let's move ahead to step number 5, which is post-collection handling. Bear in mind that after seeds are harvested, almost all of them contain relatively large amounts of water. And you have to dry them partly to avoid the potentially lethal bacterial or fungal infections that can sweep through your collection very quickly. But also you're drying them because it makes them easier to clean. It makes, once the seed is dried, it makes the seed more resistant to pathogens that might eat, some of them, that might eat the seeds. And it also prepares the seeds for dormancy. This is how they're designed. Some seeds require drying prior to germination. And it's best if you handle this relatively quickly following collection. We'll talk about how to do that coming up. But here I'm going to show you more about the record keeping. So there's a log for everything that we collect. And here we have Asclepias syriaca. I was talking about that earlier. Just the collector in this case was a team. They have the source where they came from, the date they were collected, and that they were uncleaned. And here's another Rudbeckia. This is Triloba, who the collectors were, where it came from, date again. This is very helpful for me for tracking and the record keeping that we do and understanding where things are coming, and also for evaluating different collectors' judgment on things and whether we need to have more of a conversation about whether something was ready or not, or what else it might have looked at. May also be a sign or an example of there's particularly good collection coming in from somewhere, and we need to really go look at that hard and get as much as we can from it. Now, mind you, this is all out of our garden areas. This approach, I would not be saying that we need to go back and get everything we can from a wild area. That's not how we work. We don't really collect from wild areas except as starter batches. So please be clear about that. Back to these, again, all the data that we've collected goes back into these lists, and so that's reproducible year after year after year and helps us save time. Once you get doing a lot of this, it gets pretty hard to keep it all straight in your head alone. But let's talk about the drying part some. Inside is typically the best place, a dry area with good air circulation. You can spread your collections out over a broad area, maybe just over a canvas cloth or over some kind of a platform, maybe just a window screen that is open below. We use cardboard trays a lot of different sizes, the small ones for small collections, the medium-sized ones. You can see that we have liners in there that helps us move the collections in and out. It also helps, these boxes always have holes in the corner, so the liners that we've made stop the seeds from slipping out through the corners. And then in the larger collections, we have these large plastic trays, which I'll tell you very quickly a story about there. Let's see, but before I go to that, let me say, you can use, to make positive airflow around these things, you can simply set up a room fan, just a table fan, to blow air through them more aggressively, to make sure that the air movement is really positive. Seeds that are encased in a fleshy fruit are best not air dried before removing the flesh. Otherwise, it gets to be impossible to remove the flesh. And you typically want to, because there are germination inhibitors in the flesh of most fruit, which kind of discourage them from germinating until the fruit is gone, which normally happens as it goes through the digestive tract of an animal, or it's set out in the ground over winter or something, and it's decomposed, eaten by other organisms. At any rate, there are species that should not dry out and need to be cleaned and sown as soon as possible. And I'll mention a couple of them. But let's go, this quick story I was going to tell you. Notice underneath these labels, I think you might be able to see, any of you know the bread company Stroman. These plastic trays were bread delivery racks that one driver one year had left on the museum's loading dock, had made a delivery of bread, actually didn't come back to pick them up. And the person that was running the kitchen at that time called repeatedly for the driver to come pick them up because they were tired of them taking up room. And this went on for week after week after week. And finally, this person said to me, "Mark, do you think you could use these trays for anything? I've called repeatedly. They don't seem to care about picking them up." And I said, "Yeah, I guess so. I had no idea what we were going to do with them, but this is what happened with them. They're perfectly stackable and they're plastic, so they don't absorb water. But I'll tell you that for years, I was afraid of showing images like this because I was sure someone connected to the Stroman company was going to bust me for having some of their materials or delivery materials. Never has happened, and I guess it probably won't now, but whenever I look at them, I remember all that very clearly. Some things like the fluffy composites, the asters, the goldenrods, the eupatoriums, they're typically collected quite dry when they are in that fluffy stage, and they can generally just sit in the bag after you collected them. In fact, they don't collect well when they're wet at all. They won't come off at that point with any success. You have to have them dry day to do them. But they can generally sit in the bag. Here's an example of a seed which really cannot dry out. Now, this is Stylophorum diphyllum, the wood poppy, or some people know it as the celandine poppy. See the seed, it's a very bristly, actually a tender but a brittle fruit, breaks easily. And all these, again, are the seams of the plant. This has seams built out, and there's 3 separate channels, maybe 4 in the, I forget. But when you squeeze these pods and when they're ripe, they will pop along the seams. If you squeeze too hard too soon, you just crush them. So there's some real sensitivity involved here, but the seeds are ripe when they're dark like this, right? There's some that are they're brown and they'll probably be okay. They're a little edgy. When they're white, they're too early. But notice they have this fleshy structure along the side of them. This is called an aril, A-R-I-L, or an eliosome, which is E-L-A-I-S-O-M-E. And these structures are really attractive to ants. Ants, this is a nutritious component of a seed to ants. And ants will come and get these and carry them back to their burrows and consume the arils. The aril, the seed is not harmed whatsoever by the consumption of the aril or the eliosome, but it does get the seed around from the parent plant. So once the ants have eaten this structure, it's basically trash to them, and they will take the seeds out and just get rid of them and dump them out wherever they take their garbage and leave them. But that is literally how many of these seeds move around in the woodland. This is Stylophorum diphyllum. Jeffersonia diphylla has a different looking structure, but same thing. Sanguinaria canadensis, the bloodroot, has one too. This is fairly common, but all of these seeds cannot dry out. You just can't store them. Once you have them, you need to sow them. So that's something important to know. And now that you have them and you've handled their post-collection appropriately, it's time to start talking about cleaning a little bit. Step 6, we're really getting through it. Cleaning is the simple concept of separating the seed from everything else taken in with the collection. This includes other plant parts, other seeds maybe, soil bits, insects that may feed upon the seeds. All those sorts of things come in with a collection from the field. Cleaning also reduces the amount of space required for storage, which gets to be more and more important the larger you go. And with a bit of additional effort, allows for measurements of quality and meaningful sales standards. We sell seeds, so it's important for us to tell people how many seeds they're going to get in a gram or an ounce or a pound before, along with the price that we are asking for them. Seeds may need to be liberated from whatever they're in by a threshing maneuver, by shaking them about in a paper bag or a 5-gallon plastic bucket, beating them in some way, crushing them, rolling, cutting, rubbing between rubber-covered paddles or gloved hands, something that I like to call tweezling, which is merely the effort of rubbing seeds or the capsules between your forefingers and your thumb. I call that tweezling. Always, you must be mindful of doing any damage to the seed in whatever process you're using. We have relied on a dissecting microscope throughout this whole time to make sure that we're not harming the seeds in the process. Now, here's some of the low-tech ways that you can get these things accomplished. These group of volunteers are hand pulling off seeds from little blue stem grass. In this case, we collected a whole bunch of, we just cut the stems out in the field, stuffed them into a paper bag, and at some point, after determining that they were ripe, stuffed them into a paper bag. At some point over a winter, we weren't wanting to work outside, you pull out the paper bags, you pull out the stems, and you have people sit around a table and just pull the seeds off. It takes a long time to get a lot of little blue stem seed. It's fluffy and very light, but it can be done. It also helps with a group of people if there's something to consume in the process. And I never did exactly know what they were eating. They called them Irish potatoes. And all I can tell you is that the more they ate, the redder their faces got, the more they were laughing, and the better time that they seemed to be having with them. I will probably never know exactly, but I'll leave it up to your guess too. But a good indoor activity, if you have the people to do that, good community happens during those things. I showed these in the beginning. This is jack-in-the-pulpit seed, and these are luscious looking fruits, each individual one on that seed head has to be pinched out. And all parts of the plant of jack-in-the-pulpit have calcium oxalate crystals in the juices. And for a lot of people, it's easily can cause dermatitis on your hands. I just did an NPF, or Native Plant Friday post, in which I talked about many a young Boy Scout being tricked into eating the root of the jack-in-the-pulpit, which is also called Indian turnip. And apparently the Indians, the Native Americans, did eat that only after it was boiled, because that destroys the calcium oxalate crystals. But many a Boy Scout, I've been told, has been tricked into eating an Indian turnip as a wild foraged food, and only to find that their mouth became inflamed with shards of glass, or so it felt like, with the calcium oxalate crystals. I've been told that holding vinegar in the mouth will dissolve them, but I've never wanted to try the whole thing. At any rate, we wear gloves, and everyone wears gloves when they're cleaning these seeds. The seeds are down in the bottom tray, you see, pinched out of the fruit. And here are two volunteers working on that. They found it was beneficial to have a tray with a little bit of water so they could rinse their fingers and rinse some of the goop off that came off along with the seeds, which is what is taking place here. Let's move over to another one with a luscious red fruit. This is Hydrastis canadensis, the golden seal. A neat woodland plant, has a long history of medicinal use, has a fruit which looks like a big raspberry. And it will be hard for you to see this, but there are lots of little brown ants all over this leaf. Turns out that ants love the fleshy fruit around these seeds. And when these are ripe, the ants start showing up, crawling up the stems to eat the fruit. And while they're doing that, they don't care about the seeds, but the seeds are being liberated and falling off onto the leaf, and most likely onto the ground below. So to get around that, and actually to have the ants do some of the work of cleaning that fruit off, which you can appreciate, pretty tiny. The seed is the size of a BB. I'll show you that in a minute. I made these stainless steel cage with mesh that was small enough to not allow the seeds to go through, but big enough to allow the ants to crawl through. So done like this and placed on the ground, the ants will come in and eat the vast majority of that fruit from around the seeds. You still have to wash them up a little bit to complete the deal, but it works pretty well. And you could do this. I did it in the beginning just with a kitchen colander with the top covered with a screen. But here's what the seeds look like at the end. Shiny, black. They look like little BBs. And this, despite not having an arrow, is another seed which does not dry out well. It needs to be sown very quickly after you get it clean like this. All right, so let's go into another one. All right, you know this now, either from your own gardening or from my earlier slide. This is a seed pod of common milkweed. Not quite as gray as that first one I showed you, but I'm going to show you how you can do this prepping cleaning, of maybe even just the cleaning that you would do for yourself without the machine component. But there are two ends here. This is the stem end where it's attached. This is the tip. And I'm going to find the seam in it. I didn't cut that with a knife. That seam is there. Because this pod is at the stage that it is at, all I have to do is pull on each side of the seam with my fingers and it's going to open up. And if I keep pulling, you can see them all lined up neatly in there. But now to get them out requires a little more technique. So what I'm going to do in the next series of slides is I'm going to turn this way, right? So the tip is going to be over here and the stem is going to be in my right hand like that, right? Now notice I've coaxed it out and I'm pinching. I am pinching that tip with my left hand and thumb, because if I let go, all of the thing is going to fly apart, not in a big springing explosion or anything, but it's just going to start falling apart. And I don't want that to be able to get the seeds out cleanly. I'm teasing the rest of the case, the pod, off of this central part. And sometimes very helpful to clip the tip off the stem end to make this easier to do. But see, I've now freed it up, still keeping that pinch on. And finally, I'll show you a nice exposure picture of what those seeds look like inside. They're just gorgeously laid out like the scales on a fish. And there's that lovely rich earthy brown, and you can see all the details in the seed coat. Really fascinating things to look at. Notice also that these are plump. When these seeds, as will happen with all collections, there will be seeds of which are not really good. Notice that these are puffy, a little bit plumped up. Those are good seeds. And you can confirm that by feeling that with your fingers too. You don't need a microscope to do that. So what I'm doing the rest of the way now is I'm keeping the pinch on, and with my right hand, I'm just pulling with my thumb and I'm wiping the seeds right off of the silk. I'm just pulling them off of the silk and letting them fall down on the container or the table below me, all while I'm holding it. If I was to let go of this now, it would just fall apart as a pile of fluff. Now, this is something that you do when you have a collection of pods that's not terribly large, or when you have time to clean them right away, to process them, to prep them. Doesn't always work that way. And we have a bag of common milkweed pods and waiting for processing now. Sometimes you don't get to them, or you get big collections brought in and they start opening up in the bag and they start all expanding and the silk starts puffing out as the pod dries. This happens. So we had this situation this one year. This is Bob, who I was fortunate enough to spend my earliest experience in seed collecting, cleaning, processing with. Bob was a primary collector at that point, and he would love to come up with procedures. So what he's doing here, he has a tray of the common milkweed silk and seeds are in that tray. And what he's doing is he's agitating it with his hands. He's kneading them and he's squeezing them and he's just kind of working it all around. He's trying to get the seeds there to drop off of the silk. Once that happens, the silk is a bit lighter. And here he is waving his hand over the tray to get, you can see them flying around in the air, to get the silk to move away, to move out of the way. Another technique that he tried was with all of that in a paper bag, just opening and closing the bag like he was making a bellows. And if you weren't too aggressive doing this after doing the kneading and so forth that I just described, on the exhale of a bag like this, you could get the silk to puff out, leaving the heavier parts to drop into the bottom. There was a lot of silk when we did this. It was all over. We did this outside, obviously. It's not something you'd want to do indoors, I don't think. And then in the end, you have a whole collection of bits of debris from the pods, but a whole lot of seeds, a little bit of silk, but now it's in a form that you can actually go ahead and clean it in the way that I will show you that we did. And there he's writing up, again, the record of what he did so that there was a testament to what was tried and how it worked out. And there's a pan of the collection in the foreground. His sweatshirt, by the way, said aged to perfection, which I've never seen another sweatshirt other than his that had that on it. Let's look at another example. And let's see. Yep, I'm going to start speeding up a little bit. So more quickly, these are the heads of purple coneflower, which sometimes are very hard and have to be broken apart. So one year we decided we would do this with actually standing on them and grinding them up through a screen. And Nora had a pair of special shoes that she owned. So she brought in her cosmic shoes. We thought this was the right choice to do this, this procedure. So what she did was she just stood on the screen and she twisted her feet around and ground them up into a smaller, finer mass. And then we pulled away all the coarse debris, swept up all the seeds and all the debris that was ground up as part of the heads, and took that to the clipper cleaner, which is where we're headed. These were a collection of Rudbeckia laciniata, which we have just collected. Marilyn's just done this too in her area out here. And these two volunteers, Kitty on the left and Peg on the right, were just rubbing the heads apart with their hands. By the time that the seeds are dry, the heads will rub right apart, and then they're prepped to throw the stems away, but we can take it to the machine and then clean it. Or if we just have a collection of screens like we have here, we'll put them through just the sieving screens to get them as close as we can. Now, I mentioned the clipper machine, which is an industry machine, but a very small one. It's designed to be used in offices, not generally to do large quantities. There are bigger machines for that, but I won't describe how this works in great detail, but it does involve airflow, which is drawn through here, blows it up through the collection. You feed seeds into the top, as Chris is doing here, and this machine will separate into 3 different splits, which by adjusting this amount of airflow and so forth, you can control the amount of air velocity that goes through the batch. And of course, you have to inspect and make decisions along the way about where you are and what you're getting and make adjustments. Here is Lou in the setup that we had before the flood that destroyed our operation for a time. You can see clean seeds on the left. This is a machine that is really for dust control over the clipper. It's the same machine I showed you earlier. And there's a microscope right there at the desk that we use throughout the process to keep track on how we're doing. Now I'm going to show you a real quick, and we don't have too many more to go now, a real quick sequence about taking something that is a composite. This is the white flower here is Aster divaricata, or today would be called Eurybia divaricata for folks that are using the new names. I still fall into the old ones pretty easily. This white flowered plant, you may have seen this in your gardens, will produce seed heads which look like this. Again, what I call the puffball stage. And when they're at this stage, if I jostle them, which I'm going to do in the next slide, the seeds are just coming off. So you haven't changed the position of the camera whatsoever. I just flicked at them a few times and then I did it again. And they're just dropping away. That's how easy it is to get them off on a dry day when they're ready to come off. This illustration, here's Aster divaricata. So what you have there is the seed, and you have this tuft of hairs, which is on the outside. The seed has been attached to that head right there at that tip. So our challenge is to try to get the hair off of the seed and to be able to separate the seed so that we really have only the good ones and not the empty ones. So this is a picture of Emily Tenali, our stellar senior horticulturist who was just learning this process. I think this was last year. She has a bag of that fluff of Aster divaricatus or Eurybia divaricata fluff. And she's going to work this through the process. There it is. That's what it looks like at this point. Hairs, seeds, spiders, little bits of stems and leaves and so forth. There's a closer look. That's a very clean collection for something like this. But you're basically looking at the hairs and the seeds attached to the hairs. So how do we do this? You're getting to look at something that few people get to see. I, through a longer story than I will tell now, learned that we could use a Cuisinart. And if I'm not mistaken, Marilyn donated this particular one. She'll have to tell you later. I think this was a wedding present that she never used. And we'll have to get a confirmation from her on this. But the first one was donated as well. But at any rate, this is a Cuisinart, an early one. And the blade has been very carefully dulled with a file. I did that. If we were to spin seeds in a Cuisinart with the factory sharp blade, it would not be pretty because the seeds would be all sliced up and damaged. And even so, it happens a little bit even with it blunted. But what's taking place in the slide is you see the phone with the timer. So we have worked out that you spin the seeds around in a Cuisinart for, in this case, 51 seconds or so. And that is about the right amount of time to knock most of the hair off of the seeds. And you can see here, I'll go into a closer look, that you're getting a separation of material. You're getting these wads, rolls of balls of hair, balling up. And then there's these darker brown parts, which are the seeds and some hairs, but they're now separated. And here you have a tray of that same material, one that's been screened a little bit. And the trick now is to go back and look and see, do we have that material run enough or enough of the seeds out of all that hair, or do we need to do some more? That's Emily checking in the microscope. And then she's checking along the way. Now you see there's not much hair in that. It's looking very different than where we started. She's looking for cutting seeds open, checking the interiors. And the end of that process, you have magic. You have what looked like just a bag of fluff, which is just like buying turf grass seed or something. All of, in this case, whitewood aster, Eurybia divaricata, Aster divaricatus. I have to tell you that to see this process happening, or to happen each time, still gives me a charge because there's so much learning went into doing that and achieving it. And this is how we sell them at this point, and anything that's fluffy like that. So well, that's an example of one of the ways we've developed to cleaning those particular things, okay? It's not essential to do that to get plants. But if you want to sell seeds, it's I think it's required to sell them with any kind of integrity. All right, let's move into storage. We're at, look, step number 7, and we're out. Now, best storage conditions for dried seed provide constant temperature and humidity. Ideally, this is 50 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and not at or below freezing, which I can talk about more if you ask me later, and 50% less of relative humidity. If the seed undergoes frequent fluctuations in temperature and humidity, it is stressful to the seed. Remember that a seed is a living unit. It has a finite amount of energy stored within its tiny little self, and it must come to an equilibrium with the conditions around it. If the conditions around it are hot and moist and then cool and dry, it is wearing on the seed and it will shorten its life while it's in storage. So that's why you want low temperature and drop in 50 degrees or lower. In a jar, in a refrigerator is great. in a jar in a cool room is great. Low light levels are also a good idea. Here's what our clean seed wall looked like before the flood of Ida. It's been massively adjusted now. We're still building up inventory of things, but ideally these things would have been in the refrigerator. That was just in a room. The refrigerator, this was our old one. This was also destroyed by Ida. We have a nicer refrigerator now. But you see the jars, the labels, all the pertinent info on each seed that's in there. This is a perfectly terrific way to store seeds. We have always done packages of seeds and large quantities too. There's a typical packet of seeds. Large quantities, as I said, this is Dave Pro from Delaware Nature Society was buying a large quantity for a meadow installation that he did. We sell seeds this way too. We have been testing our seeds and recording the germination percentages for as long as I've been in the organization. This is Marcia, who's our chief recorder of observations. And so again, these are all entered into a database too. Our seeds go into, our propagation efforts go into our plant sale, which you're seeing a picture of here, held always over Mother's Day weekend in the courtyard of the museum. We do buy plants in from other growers too. We can't grow them all. It's too big for that now, and we're too small. Here's a couple of shots of the courtyard. And that cart houses our Asclepias that we have for our sale each year. We've been doing this for, Brandywine's been doing this for 44 years now, doing all that we can do to improve the lives of our feathered friends around us. I mentioned earlier the viburnum. This is the dried raisin stage, which is about when a bird like a robin will be plucking at it and eating it. We've been doing this to benefit the creatures that we live with, our small ones, our small pollinators, our larger, very showy butterflies, and of course, even those that dwell right on the ground, don't get up into the plants, but certainly benefit from the habitat that's provided to them. And you, of course, are also doing your part in all of this. And I hope that this has helped you learn more about how you may move into being successful seed collectors and take advantage of this part of the plant's offering for your own work. I'll leave you with this quote from Norm Dino, who said in his book, "To plant a seed is a noble deed. Propagation is conservation." And with that, I will conclude this part. Grab a drink of water, and if you have questions, I will be happy to entertain answering them. I think I would stop sharing now, would be correct.
Yeah, Mark, that would be great. Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot. We have a couple questions, but take a sip first. Let people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I gotta take my headset off. We'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. If anybody else has questions, I'm going to read the two that are in the chat, and then you can either type a question in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask once we have these two questions answered.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, Mark. So the first question we have is, can you collect some seeds not quite brown and still dry to a viable brown seed? For example, Clematis virginiana.
Possibly. I always err in on waiting as long as possible. There are some seeds that will, some people use the term after ripen, that will continue to ripen after you've taken them off the plant. I would still stick to the criteria of, with the clematis, if you go up and you tug at that head a little bit, if the seed does not want to come off at all, you probably should wait. The other thing you're looking for with the clematis is that the seed is turning a dark brown. If they're still white or green, they are not ripe yet. So I would not take them. I would wait. Look for the color change, especially this is easy to do if you can access the plants on a regular basis. You just look every day, every other day, or something like that. When they are brown, they're ripe, and that would be the safer time to take them off the plant. I only have found from experience the ones that will, I don't like the term after ripen, but I guess it's fair enough. That will continue to ripen after you've taken them and where they weren't showing the right colors. Tradescantia virginiana or Tradescantia ohioensis is one of them. I would always wait if you can, and look for that change in the seed itself, not the tail, but the seed right up as it's connected, attached right to the disc of the flower.
Okay, good to know.
And then I'll add one more thing. The way that we found some of these things out is only by sowing them and seeing what's happened with the germination results later, right? Because then you're really seeing whether you got plants or not and whether it worked. That's slow, but that's foolproof at that point.
Excellent. Must you dry seed before refrigeration?
Yes, I would. It's not going to dry well in the refrigerator, especially in a glass jar. You want them out in the open, good air movement, and probably at least a week is reasonable at that condition. Maybe 2 is better before you put them into a jar and then into the refrigerator. What can easily happen, you put them into a closed container like that, you'll see the moisture still coming out of the seed forming on the sides of the jar. And that usually is not good for the seed in storage. It's too humid.
Can they get too dry if you don't get to cleaning them soon enough?
Of the ones that should be dried out, not really. I mean, if you expose them to high heat, that would be damaging in another way. You would be increasing their respiration and causing them to try to equilibrate at a much higher temperature, that you would be speeding up their metabolism, basically burning them up in a way. No, they will only drop the dryness if it's a seed which is expected to dry out. Not really. No, you can't. It's only that is a problem for those that can't dry out. But no, that's a legitimate question and concern, but basically wouldn't happen in your house.
Okay, excellent. Someone is asking for some recommendations on how to collect flax seed.
Yes.
If they're having trouble collecting flax seed, what's the trick?
I can understand that one. That's a challenging one. So you, Carolyn, you're the one. So phlox, and I assume you're talking about paniculata, right? Garden phlox or summer phlox. The real challenging thing about that is the clusters are all ripening at different times. And when they are ripe, the little individual pods pop and the seeds fly out. So what we do here is you start evaluating your individual clusters, and you're looking for the pod casings to turn tan, going from green towards a tan. And a good indicator on an entire stem end is that you're seeing some of them that have already popped and some of them that are still green. So now you know you're in the right ballpark, and you're really going, if you want to be really detailed about it, you go after the individual clusters of the ones that are pale, tan, and not popped open yet. And then you just clip them off and take them. Now, you take them and you put them in a tray, for example, but you better cover the tray, because as they dry, they're going to pop and they're going to fly out of the tray. Literally, I had a collection brought into me last week, and we had it prepped. It came in a grocery bag of, like I described, all those cut off clusters. We took the clusters off of the stems, left them in a tray over the weekend, I thought they were dry enough. I never thought about covering them. I came in on Monday and Emily, who you met, asked me, what happened here? And she pointed at the table that tray was on, and it looked like an animal had been in the tray, and the seeds were 4 or 5 feet away from the tray, all over the place, on the floor, on the tables. You need to cover them if you want to keep them. But that one's challenging, and the window goes on for quite a while, and you can never just cut the whole end and get all of them.
And that's paniculata that you're talking about? Phlox
Yes.
paniculata? Okay.
Now, I've never seen the seeds of other phloxes that we might be growing, like Stolonifera, divaricata. They just don't make seeds very much. Paniculata is it's easy enough, but it's time consuming, and it runs a long period to collect it.
Interesting.
It also doesn't last long. So if you have that, sow it, and sow it like in late winter outside. It needs a cold, moist period to germinate. Don't hang on to it for years before you sow it. It won't be very good in my experience. It doesn't last long in storage.
Okay.
Perfectly. All right, go ahead. Yes.
That's a good segue to how do you determine which seeds need a cold soak? I'm assuming cold moist stratification, as if they just popped off the plant without assistance and were outside all winter, versus if they don't need that. Is that just knowing the seed you're collecting and what techniques you need to?
Yeah. Okay, that's great. The one thing I can say, and I can send this to you, our seed catalog has germination codes on it, and it will tell you whether something needs a cold moist period or not. Any source that covers the germination recommendations will include that somewhere in its content. But as a quick way, I'd say, like the one William Kalina's book will tell you, that if you ask for our seed catalog, I can send you a copy. You can share it with all of your members. The codes are on there, and an explanation about the codes is on there as well. That's probably a pretty efficient way to access that to get started.
Excellent. And Judy asks, how did you figure that out? Is that just trial and error through years of data collection, figuring out which seeds needed this period?
Yeah. Great question. Yes, it's that. It's also just looking at a lot of other sources and seeing what other recommendations there are. In some cases, it has involved finding out that seeds of us behave differently than they did somewhere else. So it's a mixed bag, but there are, a whole lot of the plants that we really enjoy, the large flowering plants, native plants, really do need a cold moist period before the seeds will germinate. And that doesn't mean just a soak in water. That means 30 to 90 days of being cold and damp. That's cold moist treatment, or cold moist stratification, as it's sometimes also called. So not just soaking in water, that can help with some things, but for most of our native plants, or native herbaceous plants, it's a cold moist treatment. So it's 30 days minimum, maybe 90.
And that speaks to their evolution of being native here, right? That's what the conditions they have evolved in, and therefore
Yes.
we're stimulating that when we're trying to propagate them.
Totally true.
Right.
Yes.
Excellent. Someone asks, can I use seed that I collected last year?
Absolutely. It's a really unfortunate mindset that the seed is only good for a year. We know from doing the germination observations that we have that some seed, especially if it's stored cool and dry, will last a very, very long time. And you can also see this in any time you've disturbed the soil in some area and found plants showing up in there that you didn't even see growing there, since you owned the place. And why we call this the soil a seed bank, or a seed bank is in the soil. for the most part, many of them last lots of years. And if anyone who has seeds that they collected last year, maybe you didn't store them in the best conditions, but I would sow them anyway and see what happens. So yeah, the 1 year thing is a misnomer completely.
It probably sells a lot more seed though.
Well, and it may be a little bit more true for some of the vegetable seeds, but yes, you're right. And probably partly for seed producers to be sure that customers are getting as fresh a seed as they can and have the best results. We'll put it that way as well. But yeah.
I think that we've gone through all of these great questions. Does anyone else feel free to unmute if you have another question? I'm going to give them a second to think about it. Mark, you've just provided so much great, thorough information. I really look forward to collecting more seed and putting your information to good use.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for sticking with it. There's a lot of material to digest and to think about, but I hope I've stepped you up forward in your interest in this area. And
Mark, can I ask a question?
certainly.
So I get a lot of seeds from Prairie Moon, and as you know, they have pretty good germination code information.
Sure.
And a fair number of the spring ephemerals that I would like to try, like Dodecathion, etc. They have a note at the bottom that says this seed may be difficult and or take a long time to germinate. So far I've avoided them. Do you have any suggestions for that? Actually, I did try Dodecathion, 2 of them, Amethystina and Media. They both came up and then they died.
Yeah. I've never tried to grow them. I would just encourage you to keep trying. Read other sources and their suggestions for how to raise them.
Okay.
I often tell people that, especially if they're new to gardening, that it may be wiser just to buy plants than to think that you're going to save money by sowing seeds and getting plants that way, because there's a whole lot of things that can happen between germination and a plant in the ground growing and looking lovely. Dodecathion, I have no experience with it, but I would just encourage you to keep learning more about it and trying, and learning about what habitat they grow in. Think about what kind of media you're using. What's your moisture regime like in the media? Does it represent something like its habitat?
Oh, that's a good idea.
That sort of thing.
That's a good point.
And just keep trying.
Okay.
You'll eventually succeed, or you'll decide you failed enough times that you're going to let go of it.
To go buy plants, right?
Right.
Does Mertensia throw seed? I mean, I have Mertensia and I
Sure.
see seedlings, but I've never seen the seeds.
It doesn't throw it away. It just falls off the plant. And
Okay.
that one is also a short window. You will see the seeds, and there's not many per capsule. There's 4, I think, maybe in a flower. The leaves will start to get limp and a little bit yellowish.
Yeah.
And you're looking for dark black seeds in the flower at the base of the receptacle that was the flower. And that's about the time that it is turning yellowish, or just before the whole plant is.
Yep.
And you can literally just go around and with them, just snip off those ends, take those trimmings somewhere where you want them and throw them on the ground. And you're sowing seeds that way.
Okay, I like it.
The other trick with that is that won't work real well if you have thick mulch or something like that. That is hard for the seeds to grow through.
Yeah.
And definitely let those plants just ripen and drop down. And you can move those little seedlings later if you have enough of them. But I would wait until they're going dormant to do
I
it.
don't see a lot of them. That's the problem. At 1 or 2, and I sometimes don't notice them till they're a foot tall and actually flowering.
Okay.
So I figure they've been there a couple of years and I missed them.
Yeah, even longer. By the time it takes several years for them to flower. So, but if you have them at that size and would like to move some, just dig a little deeply around them It's a brittle root, but you can move them easily enough.
It is. I've tried to move them years ago from Jersey where there was a lot of clay and it was tough to
Yeah.
move them. They
Tough
didn't like it.
digging. Yeah, that's
It was
tough
hard digging. Yeah, I
Yeah.
felt like I didn't get enough of the root.
Yeah.
But thank you for the point about the seeds. I'll hunt for that I'll hunt for that in the spring.
Good. Good luck.
Would that be one of the plants that you could utilize the small little jewelry bags to tie on to capture the seeds?
You could another way, but because the stem starts falling apart, it doesn't, and the stem is so delicate, it won't support that weight and that structure very easily without the stem just breaking on you.
Okay.
An easier way, in fact, I had one volunteer at one point who collected it by actually laying cloth like sheets below her plants and letting them fall and then lifting up the sheet to gather up the seeds that had fallen. You might try that with even a piece of cardboard. Obviously, you got water to consider if you're doing that, but a cloth or a screen placed below your plants might catch them. And if you just think about that principle, you can decide whether it's practical in your spot or not. But again, this is a really close observation thing. And just, if you keep looking at the plants, you will see the seeds there in the receptacle of the flower. And when they're dark, you can start collecting them. And if you have a lot of them, you find one's dark, then you probably have more. And it's very learnable if you just start paying attention that way. That's how we did it.
Excellent point. All right, Mark, thank you so much. I think we've answered everybody's questions. I look forward to sharing your outline of the presentation then with everyone so they can study and go forth and seed collect.
Hey, there you go. Great. And I will send you our catalog. I'll tell everybody it's a 2022. We never did get it revised for 2023. That won't happen now until the winter when we'll have a 24 version, but I will send it to you.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
you can share it.
Sounds great. All right, guys. We just have a couple more things that we're going to go over for the rest of the meeting. Stick in here with me a few more minutes. These were actually, I had copied in case we needed this for any backup. I wanted to give everybody an example and my permission to allow your native plant habitat garden to look like this in October. It's okay if it's wild and unruly. It's okay if there's just a narrow path. These are actually all volunteer asters.
Mm-hmm.
They are old field asters or Symphyotrichum pilosum, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
There's some New England asters in there that were not planted in these spots, but have volunteered from other locations. To the left, in this picture, there is a smoke tree, which is our tree of the month that will be in our newsletter. So it's the one that is just starting to turn the yellow leaves there. Behind those smoke trees, this is a little hidden picnic area that I have. There's also a lot of sumac there. There's pokeberry there. The birds love it. You can tell by the picnic table that the squirrels love it. There are hazelnuts there that I got one hazelnut off of a very laden 2 very tall shrubs of hazelnuts, but the squirrels come and enjoy the hazelnuts at the picnic table like they're little people. It's adorable. So I thoroughly enjoy seeing that they've been there to enjoy the things that I would like them to share a little more of. But and I was really very fortunate. I don't know that this would ever happen again. But I came home from work one night and this lovely lady had just freshly molted in my kitchen. I don't know where she came from. I don't know how she got in there. But I got to see her wings dry out and lengthen in this series of photographs. They're all
Wow.
terrible. The lighting in my kitchen was terrible. I could not get better pictures on my phone, but it was so fascinating to see her little wet wing nubs. I don't know if she came in on one of my dogs, if she hitchhiked. I just don't understand how she was in my kitchen at 9 o'clock at night. But you can see in these last few photos, she's like plumped up. Her wings are fully extended. There is her little discarded, I don't even know the correct term, her
Epidermis.
skin casing. Yeah. And then we took her outside and put her with the goldenrods and asters. You can tell in the pictures that her back right leg, she's missing a foot. So I don't know if that was part of how she got stuck on something, that she came in on somebody, or I don't know her whole backstory, but I just couldn't believe my luck in getting to see this whole thing happen, because it never would have happened outside. I never would have seen her and been able to watch her for the whole time. And this all took maybe an hour and a half for her to get her wings fully uncurled and flat and dried, and took her outside.
Justin brought her in because he knew how much you would love to see it.
That would be so romantic and something he would do. However, he did not do it. He was as fascinated as I was when I pointed it out to him. But I was just talking to Phil, and I look over, I moved a loaf of bread, and there she was. And it's funny because the thing that she is on, that metal thing, it's shaped like a branch. Like, I don't know if she thought it was a branch. Like, it was just goofy. I couldn't believe it. So I wanted to share that with everybody because it was just so fun. Tomorrow afternoon, actually, I am doing a webinar with Benjamin Vaught. I tried to figure out a link to share with you guys so you could easily sign up for it, but I couldn't. I saw it on Facebook. I registered for it a couple weeks ago. It is the first time he's giving this webinar, and it is the trouble with garden design. He's basically saying he's gonna give bunches of pictures and examples of things that have gone right and things that have gone wrong over his years of designing with native plants. And I look forward to seeing it, because as you could tell from the picture of my garden, one of the pictures of my garden right now, I have a tender heart when it comes to volunteer plants. And I think that they may be my undoing, because I have a lot of thugs that move in, and because I don't take care of corralling them, they may just trot over the diversity that I'm trying to build. But I'm hoping maybe something in his presentation will make me have a stronger spine to get rid of some of those thugs. Or maybe not. Maybe he'll be like, yeah, do it. It's fine. So I don't know. But I look forward to this presentation. If you can figure out how to join it, maybe join me during it. It'll be recorded for those who register. It was $19, I think, very reasonable. And the recording will be available for 2 weeks after the presentation. This is another list of lots of events that are happening over the next month. November 16th, I believe, is our next meeting. That's the last event listed on this list. And it is also the evening that a Wild Ones webinar through National will be happening, that you can register through the website. You probably got an email from them, like from National, about it too. The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants by Neil DeBold, and I would like to attend that. However, we have to have our vote for our new board and officers that evening. So I think we should quick get together, have our vote for 5 minutes, and then all tune into this presentation.
But you have to register for in advance, but it's super easy. It's no chance, I guess you're busy on the 9th, or if we can't move it up a week, our meeting.
I probably work that previous, but
Yeah, that's what I was figuring.
yeah, we can figure it out. We have a month.
Jesse, how do we vote?
We show up and we raise our hands.
Well,
Okay.
I was
Our
actually-
Benjamin Vaught has a website called Monarch Gardens,
Mhm.
and that event is listed on Monarch Gardens.
Is it? I tried to look earlier. I did not see it, but
I
if you
thought,
see it, perfect.
bervogt@gmail.com. bervogt. I'll put that in the website.
Excellent.
Jesse, I was gonna say something about the voting,
Yes.
if you'd like. Some chapters allow a vote by email for, say, a week before the meeting. That
Okay.
would definitely allow us to reach members who can't attend the meeting or have, other priorities. If you'd like, I can send out the slate a week before the meeting and ask for responses by the 15th and then collate everything. And then we can also have a vote at the meeting for people who attend.
That's a great idea. I
Okay.
like that.
We would include a lot more members that way. And also, if everybody wants to jump on the Prairie presentation, why don't we meet at 6:45? Get the vote out of the way, and then can we do that, or is that too much?
I don't think that that's too much at all. We'd already be
Messing.
there. It takes just a few minutes. Every position is uncontested.
Right.
So I think it's, not a big deal just to say, yay, we're thankful that you will all do this great work and we really appreciate it. We vote for you.
Absolutely thankful.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can just vote real quick and then go over to the website, sure.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I think when I send out the email that has the newsletter and the outline from tonight's excellent presentation and the information about the recording, I will say that will be our plan, that we'll have a very brief meeting simply to vote at 6:45 on the 16th with intentions to all change over to the national webinar and to register for that separately.
Okay.
That sound fair?
That sounds like a plan.
I
Yeah.
love it. Excellent. When a plan comes together. Okay, and then I'd like to end on this, which is our list of fully or partially native nurseries. I'm going to double check the chat. Yes, Ben Vaught. Yes. Yeah, Marilyn. So you had seen the link to be able to register for that webinar.
I thought I did. I might double check it, but I know that yes, I've seen it and I thought it was on that one.
Excellent. Yeah,
I'll have to
that
go
is, you're
check.
right, that is his website. I had just done a quick perusal earlier today and did not see it listed as something that I could easily put a link to for this presentation, but I did not put a lot of time in it, so hopefully it is there. Does anyone have anything else before we conclude the evening?
Yeah, I have a quick note for everybody. I was up at Hungry Hook today talking to Sherry, and she's going to start selling seeds. And thought it was kind of pertinent to this presentation, but I thought she mentioned sometime in December, it'll be on her website. But then I asked her, I said, would she sometimes holds classes up there? And I said, would you like be possibly doing a seed starting class? And, I think she has interest in doing that. So keep your eyes open for that.
Oh, that's excellent. Yes. Brandywine sells seed, as I'm sure we all learned tonight from Mark's presentation. I like to have people purchase seeds from these more local places, because the closer to our eco regions that we can get seed from, the better chances we have. And it's just better adapted seed for the most part. So Brandywine, if Sherry starts doing it through Hungry, there's also Toadshade Wildflower out of New Jersey, which is close to a lot of us here, the same eco region for sure. So there are good sources close to us to get good viable seed.
I found a copy of Brandywine's seed catalog from 22. They had 127 different varieties of seeds. They have quite a seed collection.
Yeah, that's really, I've never had their catalog. I've only looked at lists, and I've gotten seed from, I don't know, from people that, because their packaging is really great and informative.
I
So,
think the catalog is online after a certain time.
okay,
I'll find out when.
excellent.
I will post now to the chat.
And he said there wasn't gonna be a new one until 24, so the 22 one is appropriate,
Right.
right?
Sorry, Rick, what are you posting?
The link to the PDF of the seed catalog from Brandywine.
And should have put that in the newsletter.
If I can-
Actually, I probably have it too somewhere. I'll look for it if,
Okay.
if you can't.
Okay, as long as somebody posts it, I can include it.
I'm sorry, posted what?
The link to the seed catalog, Brandywine seed catalog online.
Um,
I haven't posted it yet. I'm trying to.
Okay,
and I'm sure it's something maybe that is linkable through their website. But if Mark said he's going to send me a catalog, so I don't know if he meant a link or a physical catalog, but if it is a link, Susan, I will send that to you to share within the newsletter.
okay, thanks.
I was talking earlier in the evening that most people don't request the link for the meeting the day of, but I checked our email and somebody did ask for it for tomorrow. So I will
Oh, that's my
let her know
mistake.
about the recording that will be available. No problem. All right, friends. Anything else that we need to address tonight?
I don't think so. I'm in the midst of seed collection. Is everybody else kind of things are starting to ripen and
I'm
got
in
envelopes
midst of
and containers?
I learned a lot. Those the non-plastic idea is spectacular. We've been collecting a lot at Brandywine. Yeah, it's a good time.
I made the mistake of collecting in glass, but not allowing the seed to dry.
That's one thing I
Mm.
learned. Yeah. So I'm gonna take everything out of the refrigerator and let it dry.
Yeah.
Those big trays we use at Brandywine are spectacular. Just lay them out and let them air dry. It's really
What is the liner he uses? Is it
it's an interesting. I'm sorry he didn't mention. It's a kind of a it's a fabric-y thing, but it doesn't seem. I'm trying to remember where I've seen it before. It's a lightweight.
it's not waxy, right?
It's not waxy, but it's
Is
also
it-
not cotton. It's
Is
something
it
that
like coffee filter paper?
Oh, you know what? That is probably it's very similar to that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not with the group that makes all those things, but they, you know, they do make it so they just fit those trays perfectly. And
Okay.
the other thing is you really have to when you're switching from one seed to the other from in a bag, be sure if you're being exact like we are, you have to really clean them out to be sure you don't get them mixed up with other seed that are just kind of left in the corners.
Right.
It looked a lot like parchment paper.
It's could be, yeah, I would think parchment paper would be really good if you have a good source for that. Probably better than say brown paper or something, because parchment paper has a little bit more air in it, it seems to me.
Okay. I know.
It definitely has a degree of airness.
I thought
Justin
parchment
has-
paper.
I'll ask Mark. I'll ask Mark what it is, and I'll
I,
put it.
I meant to
I'll
ask
let you
and I
know.
forgot. I thought parchment paper was waxed.
Me too.
Oh,
I think I would not use
well,
it.
see, I'm not a baker, so I will ask Mark what it is.
I know
and
Justin
I'll
has
let you all know.
Coffee filter
access to-
paper would be good.
Yeah, I have
think.
through Justin, I have access to rolls of coffee filter paper. So if somebody
Ooh.
would need that, if they want to expand their seed
Where
collection,
would you get that?
drying, I have that.
I will find, and I will find out, so we can all be successful.
Excellent.
And I
Good.
did figure out how to get the list into the chat. So if there's a link to the PDF in the chat for Brandywine's seed catalog.
I
I
know
see
I
it.
have
Thank
it
you.
somewhere in my computer, and I'll find it, and I'll also get it. I mean, yeah, I'll double check with Mark if you all don't get it.
Quite a list.
Yep. It's a busy group out there if anybody wants to volunteer.
A little
Oh,
far from me. I wish you
heck
guys were
Tuesdays
closer.
and Thursdays?
Yes.
They're
Well, I
just-
wish I lived closer. I'm an hour away.
Yeah, we
so
are pretty
that's-
far away from most people. That's too
Yeah.
bad.
Well,
Justin put in the chat
no,
about the coffee filter paper, 40 inches wide.
I like that.
That sounds spectacular.
It
Wow.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
Wow.
No, I just wish I lived closer.
I'm actually very close. If we were interested, who should we contact?
Mark Gormel,
Oh, just contact him.
contact him, or Emily Tenali is TINETENILLI, I think. I can put her name in the thing too. She's Mark's assistant who kind of organizes stuff.
Yeah.
But Mark
Okay.
will respond.
Okay, thanks.
Or you tell me. I'll get you in touch. It's a fun group. We really do have a good time. And
Mark's
lots
email-
of options.
Mark's email is in that link, by the way, that I
Good.
put. It's
I
on
mean,
the first
that's
page.
really all you need.
Okay.
He's a busy
hadn't-
man, but he does respond.
I had not really thought about collecting seeds because I've got so darn many plants to plant. But yeah, why not collect them instead of buying them?
Absolutely.
Which
That's
is what I would ordinarily do.
And the eco-region issue I think is very valid, because I've tried seeds from Wild Seed Project in Maine,
Mhm.
and they just don't, I mean, it's much better to work with things from around here. It just makes more sense. Probably ecologically more valuable too.
Right. Yep.
All right, folks.
All right, guys. It was a great time. Thank you for joining
Yeah,
us.
enjoyed it.
Thank you for such a great presentation, Marilyn,
Thank
for
you.
organizing
No,
that.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Smart.
It was very good.
Yeah,
Good.
very
I'm
knowledgeable.
glad.
He logged off before I had a chance to thank him, but we need to see him definitely.
I
tell him
will.
thanks
I
for me.
will. I will tell him.
We definitely ended our year with a bang. Very nice.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
All right,
Bye.
guys. Have
See
a
you.
great
Everybody
Okay,
good.
night, everybody.
Good night.